The empire of Cyrus the Great was a wonder of the ancient world, vast and glittering, spreading across lands that had once seemed ungovernable. From the valleys of Mesopotamia to the mountains of Anatolia, from the banks of the Indus to the shores of the Mediterranean, the Persian king stitched together kingdoms and tribes under the banner of one of history's first great empires. His name carried the weight of destiny, whispered with awe even among his enemies. He had broken Babylon, humbled Lydia, and spread fear into the hearts of kings who once thought themselves unconquerable. To many it seemed that Cyrus was touched by the gods themselves, that his victories were more than mortal conquests, but the unfolding of divine will. Yet beyond the cultivated fields and gilded cities of Persia stretched another world, one far less tamed and far more dangerous. It was a land of windswept plains, where rivers cut through endless steppe, where mounted warriors lived as free as the eagles overhead. Here, in the shadowy expanse north of Persia, dwelled the Massagetæ, a confederation of fierce nomads who lived not behind walls, but under the open sky. They were horsemen and archers, hunters and raiders, drinking the milk of their herds and feasting on what the land provided. And they were led by a queen whose name would echo through time, Tomyris. Unlike the gilded courts of Persia, the rule of Tomyris was born not from dynastic pomp, but from the respect of her people. She was known as a warrior, a mother, and a leader of iron will. Her tribe had long lived free of foreign dominion, and she intended to keep it so. Where Cyrus expanded his empire with treaties and marriages as often as with steel, Tomyris stood apart, a sovereign unbent, unyielding, unwilling to see her people reduced to subjects of a foreign king. The winds of the steppe carried her name to Persia as a reminder that there were still nations too wild to be caged. Cyrus, however, was not a man accustomed to hearing the word no. For years his empire had grown without limit, each conquest feeding into the next, each victory proving that the world itself could be molded by his ambition. Yet ambition has no boundary, and in time his eyes turned north. The Massagetæ, fierce as they were, seemed to him not unconquerable but inevitable. If the edge of his empire stopped at their frontier, then it was incomplete. To leave them free was to admit there was a power beyond his reach, and that was something Cyrus could not abide. The first move came not with spears, but with words. Cyrus sent envoys to Tomyris, draped in silks and bearing gifts, offering her his hand in marriage. On the surface it seemed a gesture of alliance, a joining of two great houses, but Tomyris saw through it at once. The marriage proposal was no partnership. It was a subtle conquest, a way for Cyrus to absorb her people into the great Persian machine without bloodshed. She refused him publicly and decisively, rejecting the greatest king of the age without hesitation. To Cyrus it was more than insult. It was defiance, a reminder that not all rulers could be charmed into submission. Her rejection festered like a wound. Cyrus was a man who had bent kingdoms, who had toppled ancient thrones and made himself master of the known world. Yet here was a woman on the steppes who dared to defy him. For all his victories, her resistance was a thorn in his crown, a challenge that gnawed at his pride. And so what began as diplomacy hardened into determination. He would have her lands, he would break her armies, and he would show the world that not even the wild riders of the north could resist Persia. As the Persian host gathered, stretching across the horizon with banners fluttering and the earth trembling beneath its march, stories spread among the tribes of the Massagetæ. Word of Cyrus's intent reached Tomyris swiftly, carried by scouts and riders. She did not waver. To her, Cyrus's advance was not the approach of destiny, but the arrogance of a king who believed no one could stand against him. She rallied her people, preparing them not behind walls, but in the open fields where they had always lived and fought. The stage was set. On one side stood Cyrus the Great, the most powerful monarch the world had yet seen, armed with the wealth of empires and the discipline of Persian armies. On the other stood Queen Tomyris, fierce and unbending, with warriors hardened by a life of survival on the steppe, riders who knew no master and bowed to no king. Between them lay the frontier of civilization and wilderness, empire and freedom, ambition and defiance. And as the sun set over the plains, both leaders knew that the coming clash would not be a mere border skirmish. It would be a battle of worlds, a struggle that would decide not only the fate of Cyrus and Tomyris, but also whether the steppes themselves could ever be tamed. The Massagetæ were unlike the empires that ringed their lands. Where the Persians built cities with towering walls and sprawling palaces, the Massagetæ carried their homes with them, their tents rising and falling with the migrations of their herds. Their wealth was not stored in vaults of gold or treasures taken from conquered lands, but in their cattle, their horses, their freedom. To outsiders they seemed wild, barbaric even, yet within their own society they possessed a rhythm of order as steady as the hoofbeats of their steeds. They were a people shaped by the vast steppe, by horizons so endless that a man could ride for days and never see their end. Every child of the Massagetæ was raised in the saddle, taught to ride and fight as naturally as others were taught to walk. Their bows were short but powerful, crafted to fire from horseback with deadly precision, and their spears were light enough to be thrown yet sharp enough to pierce armor. To the Persians, who marched in disciplined ranks and relied on heavy infantry and elaborate strategy, the Massagetæ appeared as shifting shadows, a force that could strike like a storm and vanish before the dust settled. Tomyris herself embodied this spirit. She was not cloistered in luxury nor isolated by rank. She rode with her people, shared in their hardships, and stood beside them in battle. Her authority came not from divine right or ancient lineage alone, but from her proven strength. She had lost her husband to war, yet instead of surrendering her throne or yielding to pressure from rival chieftains, she had claimed her place as leader. Those who doubted her quickly learned that she was as unyielding as the land itself, a woman who could not be intimidated nor bent to another's will. Her son, Spargapizes, was a warrior in his own right, a symbol of continuity and strength for their tribe, and together they represented both the present and future of Massagetæ freedom. It was this freedom that Cyrus threatened. The Persians offered wealth, order, and the grandeur of empire, but to the Massagetæ such things were chains, gilded though they might be. To live under Cyrus would mean abandoning the open plains for submission to a monarch who demanded obedience above all. Tomyris knew this well, and she made it clear to her people that the Persian king did not seek alliance, but domination. Her voice rang out in councils and gatherings, reminding them of their heritage, of the countless generations who had lived and died free. To yield would mean betraying the bones of their ancestors scattered across the steppe. The clash between these two worlds was inevitable, yet Tomyris did not rush blindly into war. She sent envoys to Cyrus, demanding that he turn back and leave her people in peace. Her message was direct, almost prophetic in its defiance. Rule your empire, great as it is, and be content. Do not seek to master those who wish only to remain free. To her, this was the final warning, the chance for Cyrus to avoid the disaster that lay ahead. But Cyrus was not a man who could be turned back by the words of a woman, no matter how powerful. Her warning only fueled his determination. The Persian king was cunning as well as ambitious, and he knew that facing the Massagetæ in the open field would be perilous. Their cavalry could harry his armies, strike his supply lines, and wear him down over weeks or months. So he devised a plan, one that blended strategy with deception. He ordered his men to construct a lavish camp just beyond the river that marked the border between Persia and the Massagetæ. Inside the camp, he filled tables with food and wine, delicacies that the nomads rarely enjoyed, and stocked it with wealth that would dazzle even the richest chiefs. He then positioned part of his army in hiding, ready to spring upon the enemy once they took the bait. When word of this camp reached Tomyris's people, her son Spargapises led a force to strike. The Massagetæ fell upon the camp, driving off the guards and seizing the treasure. But Cyrus's trap had been laid too well. Once the nomads had gorged themselves on the intoxicating wine, a drink unfamiliar and overwhelming to them, the Persians struck. Chaos followed. The Massagetæ, unsteady from the drink, were slaughtered, and Spargapises himself was captured alive. It was a devastating blow, not only militarily but personally. For Tomyris, the loss of her son at the hands of the Persians was more than tragedy. It was insult, manipulation, a wound carved into her soul. She pleaded for his release, offering Cyrus the chance to end the matter with mercy. Yet Cyrus held his prize, certain that possession of the prince would break the queen's resolve. But Spargapises, proud son of the steppe, refused to live as a captive. Seizing a blade, he ended his own life rather than remain bound by Persian chains. When the news reached Tomyris, grief gave way to fury. The loss of a child is a pain beyond measure. Yet in her heart, it became something more than personal. It became the cause of her people, a vow for vengeance. She sent one final message to Cyrus, one that has resounded through the ages. She told him that for all his thirst for blood, she would give him his fill. She swore that when the battle came, she would slake his hunger not with victory, but with his own life. The plains grew restless as both armies prepared for the inevitable clash. The Persians, disciplined and confident, stood behind their king, the architect of empire. The Massagetæ, burning with vengeance, rallied to their queen, their hearts hardened by loss and their spirits sharpened by rage. Across the river, two forces stared at one another, knowing that soon the steppe itself would be drenched in blood. The river Araxes marked the divide between Cyrus's empire and Tomyris's freedom. Its waters glimmered beneath the sun like a boundary set by the gods themselves, daring either side to cross. For days, both armies gathered along its banks, the Persians raising their standards and fortifications, the Massagetæ gathering in great herds of horses and warriors whose eyes shone with fire. The air was tense, the silence between them broken only by the distant sound of drums and the restless whinnying of steeds. Cyrus, ever the strategist, believed the nomads could be contained with patience and precision. He had dealt with steppe raiders before, and though dangerous, they could be ground down by discipline and superior resources. His soldiers, drawn from across his empire, Persians, Medes, Babylonians, and more, formed a tapestry of civilizations under his banner. Heavy infantry stood with spears and shields, archers lined the rear, and cavalry waited at the flanks, trained to strike with devastating force. It was the culmination of years of conquest, a professional army loyal to the greatest king of their age. But Tomyris's people were not like any foe he had faced before. The Massagetæ had no walls to defend, no cities to burn, no treasure to ransom. Their lives were bound to the steppe, to the herds and the hunt, and their warriors fought not for wealth or obedience, but for survival and honor. They were mounted in great numbers, their bows strung tight, their lances gleaming in the sun. Their movements were fluid, not rigid. They flowed across the plains as naturally as rivers, turning battlefields into shifting tides. And above them all, Tomyris rode, her armor glinting, her eyes fixed upon the Persian king who had taken her son. When the armies finally clashed, it was not with hesitation but with a fury long contained. The Massagetæ surged across the river like a thunderstorm, their horses kicking up clouds of dust, arrows raining down in dark waves. Persian shields rose to meet the hail, the sound of wood and iron struck by shafts echoing across the plain. Cyrus ordered his lines to hold, and for a time they did, their discipline absorbing the first onslaught. But the Massagetæ were relentless. They circled, wheeled, and struck from angles the Persians struggled to predict. The battle stretched on beneath the blazing sun, each side refusing to yield. The Persians countered with cavalry charges, their armored riders crashing into the Massagetae ranks, breaking through only to be swallowed again by swarms of nomad horsemen. The ground trembled beneath the weight of thousands of hooves, the air thick with dust and the cries of the dying. Tomyris fought at the front, her spear flashing, her presence a rallying point for her warriors. She was no distant commander issuing orders from safety, but a queen who risked her life beside her people. Each strike, each cry, carried the weight of vengeance for her fallen son. Her warriors, inspired by her fury, pressed harder, refusing to let the Persians find rest or reprieve. Cyrus, too, threw himself into the fray. He was not a king who ruled by distance, but one who had risen through his own prowess. Sword in hand, he carved his way through the melee, his guards protecting him as he sought to drive back the storm. He had conquered kingdoms by sheer will before. Why should these nomads be any different? His voice rose above the clash, urging his men to stand firm, to remember that they were the army of Persia, destined to bring order to the chaos of the world. But the steppe is not a place easily ordered. As the day wore on, the Persian lines began to falter beneath the constant pressure. The Massagetae struck and withdrew, never allowing their enemies to recover. Each wave chipped away at discipline. Each feigned retreat pulled the Persians further into confusion. The plains that had seemed so open now worked against the Persians, giving the nomads endless room to maneuver, endless space to draw them out. The battle became a storm of dust and blood, a whirlwind in which friend and foe were sometimes indistinguishable. And in that storm, Cyrus began to see what he had underestimated. These were not barbarians to be lured by wine or treasures. They were warriors, hardened by a life that had made them fierce beyond measure. Their queen had bound them together with a cause greater than survival. They fought with the fire of vengeance, the conviction that they defended something sacred, the freedom of their people, the honor of their fallen prince. As the sun dipped lower, the Persian army, exhausted and battered, began to break. The Massagetae pressed their advantage, their cavalry striking deeper, their arrows cutting down retreating soldiers. Cyrus, still at the center, refused to yield. Surrounded by his guards, he continued to fight even as the tide swallowed him. But the tide of the steppe was merciless. One by one his guards fell, until Cyrus himself stood exposed, a king against a nation's wrath. There, amid the chaos, the destiny of empires shifted. The man who had been called the father of nations, the conqueror of Babylon, the ruler of the known world, was struck down. Whether by arrow or spear, whether by a Massagetae warrior or by Tomyris' own hand, the chronicles do not agree. But the result was certain. Cyrus the Great, invincible in the eyes of many, lay dead upon the steppe. The battle did not end with his fall alone. His army, leaderless, collapsed entirely, slaughtered by the Massagetae in their fury. The steppe drank deeply of Persian blood that day, the promise of empire drowned in a river of vengeance. And when the dust finally settled, it was not the conqueror of kingdoms who stood victorious, but a queen who had defended her people with unbreakable resolve. The plain was silent after the storm, broken only by the moans of the dying and the cries of scavenger birds circling overhead. The bodies of Persians and Massagetae alike lay scattered across the field, but the balance was unmistakable. The great Persian host, once so disciplined and mighty, had been torn apart. And at its center lay the body of Cyrus the Great, a man whose name had become synonymous with destiny, brought low not in the marble halls of Babylon, nor upon a gilded throne, but on the wind-swept steppe he had sought to conquer. The death of Cyrus could have been enough for Tomyris. Her people had defended their freedom, their queen had avenged her son, and the mightiest king of the age had fallen at her hand. Yet the wound left in her heart was deeper than a battlefield triumph could heal. Her son Spargapeses, deceived and slain through Persian trickery, could not be brought back. For Tomyris, victory was not enough. There had to be reckoning, a punishment that would resound through the ages as a warning to all who would dare to strike her people with guile and arrogance. According to Herodotus, whose pen immortalized the tale, Tomyris ordered Cyrus's corpse to be brought before her. The lifeless king, still clad in the armor that had carried him through countless battles, was no longer a figure of awe, but a broken shell. She looked upon him not with fear, but with scorn, addressing him as one would a fallen enemy whose pride had led to ruin. "Though I have conquered you and live, you have ruined me," she is said to have declared. "You took my son by deceit, but I give you your fill of blood, as I swore I would." Then she commanded a skin filled with human blood to be brought forward. Into it she thrust the head of Cyrus, fulfilling her vow with chilling literalness. The symbolism was unmistakable. A king who had thirsted for blood, who had driven countless nations into submission, was now drowned in the very thing he had spilled in abundance. It was vengeance elevated into ritual, the transformation of grief into a grim kind of justice. Whether this act was historical fact or later embellishment mattered little to those who heard it. For the Persians, it was a tale both shameful and terrifying, a reminder that even the greatest could fall. For the Massagetæ and their allies across the steppes, it was legend, proof that no empire could chain the spirit of free riders. And for later generations, it became myth, a story of a woman who defied the conqueror of the known world and stood triumphant. The Persian army, shattered and leaderless, limped homeward, carrying with them the weight of defeat. The empire did not collapse. Cyrus had built too broad a foundation for his death alone to undo it. But the loss shook it to its core. His heirs, Cambyses and later Darius, would carry on his legacy, expanding Persia into an empire even greater than before. Yet Cyrus's final campaign left a scar, a reminder that there were limits even to the power of kings. For Tomyris, the victory secured her people's independence for a generation. The Massagetæ did not vanish into Persian subjugation, but remained fierce and free, the guardians of their plains. Their queen's name spread far beyond their lands, whispered in Greece, in Babylon, in Egypt, wherever tales of defiance were told. She became a symbol not only of steppe resilience, but of the power of women to lead, to fight, to stand against the mightiest of men. In a world where kings were sung of endlessly, Tomyris carved a place for herself through action, not inheritance. Yet the story of Tomyris and Cyrus is not just a tale of blood and vengeance. It is also a meditation on ambition and the costs of unchecked conquest. Cyrus had risen higher than nearly any ruler before him, but ambition is a hunger that cannot be satisfied. Each victory only stoked the desire for more, until he sought to conquer even those who wished only to be left alone. His greatness, in the end, became his downfall. Tomyris, by contrast, did not seek to build an empire or extend her will across the earth. She sought only to defend what was hers, to protect her people and their way of life. In that difference lay the seed of Persia's defeat. The image of Cyrus's head dipped in blood lingered in the imagination of later ages, an enduring reminder of the fragility of power. It was told and retold in the courts of Greece, in the chronicles of Rome, in the whispers of medieval storytellers. Each retelling carried its own meaning. For some, it was the warning against hubris. For others, the vindication of those who resist tyranny. And for many, it was simply the story of a queen whose courage and fury could shake the earth. On the steppes, life returned to its rhythm. Herds grazed once more, riders swept across the plains, children were taught to shoot and ride. But the memory of that battle, of the day when Tomyris stood against the might of Persia and triumphed, became part of their living heritage. Around campfires, beneath endless skies, her name was spoken with pride. She was no ordinary ruler, no fleeting figure lost to time. She was Tomyris, the queen who struck down Cyrus the Great, the woman who changed the course of history with her defiance. Long after the dust of battle had settled on the plains, long after the bones of warriors had been buried beneath the grass, and the winds had swept clean the scars of war, the story of Tomyris and Cyrus refused to fade. In the courts of Persia, in the agora of Greece, and in the chronicles of distant lands, their confrontation was retold, reshaped and remembered as a turning point, the day when empire met its match, and a queen became legend. For Persia, the death of Cyrus was both a wound and a crucible. He had been more than a king. He was the architect of an empire that spanned horizons, the model of kingship that his successors sought to emulate. His fall to the Massagetæ was a bitter reminder that even the greatest are mortal. Yet it did not end his dynasty. His son Cambyses took the throne, and later Darius would expand the empire to heights even Cyrus had not dreamed of. Persia endured, but the aura of invincibility that had clung to Cyrus was gone. No longer could Persians claim that their king was chosen by destiny to rule unchallenged. Somewhere on the steppe, beyond the reach of marble palaces and golden crowns, a queen had proven otherwise. For the Greeks, who would later fight against Persia themselves, the tale of Tomyris was a source of fascination. To them, it confirmed a truth they often clung to, that freedom was worth more than empire, that those who fought for their own way of life could topple even the greatest monarchs. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, immortalized her act of vengeance, her defiance, her triumph over a king who sought to devour the world. Greek audiences, suspicious of Persian power, celebrated her as a heroine, a barbarian queen who humbled the might of Asia. Yet Tomyris was more than a character in Greek morality tales. For her own people, she was the embodiment of their spirit, fierce, untamed, unwilling to be ruled. Among the nomads of the steppe, leadership was not a right but a duty proven in action. By defeating Cyrus, Tomyris secured her people's independence and gave them a story that bound generations. Mothers told their children of the queen who avenged her son. Warriors carried her name into battle as a talisman of courage. And elders spoke of her as proof that the free could never truly be conquered. In later centuries, Tomyris was remembered in many forms. To some, she was a symbol of maternal fury, the mother whose grief burned so fiercely it brought down an empire. To others, she was the warrior queen, standing alongside figures like Boudica or Zenobia, women who defied the might of empires. Artists of the Renaissance painted her with Cyrus's head in hand, her vengeance dramatized as both terrifying and righteous. Historians debated the truth of her story. Was Cyrus truly slain by her warriors, or was this a tale spun by enemies of Persia to tarnish his legacy? Yet whether fact or myth, the story endured because it carried a deeper truth. The reminder that no power, no matter how great, is beyond challenge. The clash between Tomyris and Cyrus was not simply a battle of armies, but a battle of worlds. On one side stood empire with its wealth, its discipline, its hunger for expansion. On the other stood freedom, wild and untamed, bound not by walls or laws, but by the loyalty of a people to their way of life. The steppe could not be ruled as cities were ruled. Its riders could not be broken as armies were broken. In the space between them, the fate of nations trembled, and for one brilliant, bloody moment, it was the queen of the Massagetæ who triumphed. What makes their story endure is not just the violence of its climax, but the human truths beneath it. Cyrus, for all his greatness, fell because he could not recognize the limits of ambition. His empire was vast, yet it was not enough. His hunger for conquest led him to a war he did not need to fight, against a people who sought only to live free. Tomyris, for her part, fought not for expansion but for survival, not for glory but for justice. In her victory lies a lesson as old as history itself. that those who fight with nothing to lose, who fight for home, for kin, for freedom, can topple even the mightiest of kings. And so the name of Tomyris lingers in the echoes of time. She is remembered not as a conqueror, but as a defender, not as an empress of lands, but as a guardian of a way of life. Her triumph over Cyrus has been told and retold for over 2 millennia, each age finding in it what it most needed: a caution, an inspiration, a reminder. For some, she is vengeance incarnate, the mother who fulfilled her oath in blood. For others, she is the queen who dared to stand against destiny itself and prove that destiny can be broken. As the centuries rolled on, the world Cyrus once ruled changed hands countless times. Empires rose and fell, kings and queens came and went, but the story of Tomyris remained. It lived in scrolls, in paintings, in the memory of storytellers who saw in her defiance something eternal. And today her tale still carries weight, the story of a woman who would not bend, who met empire with resistance, who turned grief into triumph. On the boundless steppe where she once rode, the winds still whisper across the grass. Perhaps, if one listens closely, one can still hear the thunder of hooves, the clash of battle, the cry of a queen who swore vengeance and kept her word. Tomyris stands as proof that history is not written only by kings and empires, but also by those who resist them, those who defend their people, those who turn the course of destiny with courage unshaken. And so it is remembered. Tomyris, queen of the Massagetae, who faced Cyrus the Great and won, who changed the course of history not by seeking power, but by refusing to surrender it. Hers is the tale of freedom against empire, of vengeance against hubris, of a queen whose legend still rides across the endless plains of time.